Hey everybody, right now you're hearing sounds from my new Ableton Live pack, Guitar Feedback. Guitar Feedback has 210 guitar feedback sounds, pick scrapes, and slides that are really useful for transitional changes in your music. There's also 25 Ableton Live instrument presets that allow you to use these sounds as melodic instruments. All of the lead sounds you're hearing right now are made with the pack. You can find this at my website, brianfunk.com. It's also part of the September 2021 downloads for the Music Production Club. And I'm really excited to announce that I can now offer your first month for free at the Music Production Club. In the Music Production Club, you get all kinds of downloads for your music production needs, educational stuff, Ableton Live pack stuff, templates, and there's an online community, and we do live classes, and every month you get something new. You can go to brianfunk.com/MPC to join the Music Production Club and get your first month free. You'll get a whole bunch of downloads, including the Guitar Feedback Ableton Live pack. And of course, if the club is not for you, you can cancel at any time and keep everything. So check out the Music Production Club, brianfunk.com/MPC. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Music Production Podcast, where we talk about all things making music. I'm your host, Brian Funk. On today's show, I have two guests, which is kind of unusual, actually. I've got Felix and John from the band The Slang. They come out of the Washington, D.C. area. They're doing a rock pop sort of thing. Their new album is going to be coming out on the 24th of September, I believe it is. It's called Divide. I've been able to listen to some of that, and it's really cool, really great songwriting, really great production, lots of nice guitar work, drumming, and synthesizers, and just an overall pleasant listen with good songs. And I'm excited to talk to both of them to learn some of their songwriting tricks and tips, how they made the album, a little bit of their backstory, and the production behind it all. I think it's going to be a cool conversation, and I'm very happy to have you both here today. John and Felix, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been really fun listening to the music. You know, like rock music that's where I come from. You know, that's my background. I played guitar when I was 14 and playing in rock bands my whole life, and I miss the days of like the guitar rock band and all that stuff. And you guys have a really nice sound going that I think brings that to the table, but also brings in some more of the like modern production aspects and a really cool sound. So congratulations on the upcoming album.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think, it's nice that you kind of noticed that, because I think when John and I were writing the record, that was literally our philosophy going into it. It's like, well, we love rock. We want to present it in a way that maybe we can kind of start heading for those top 40 folks that need to, experience more guitars in their life. And hopefully we can lure a few folks in.
I've seen like over the last few years, like, a blog post here or there that talks about like how the guitar is like slipping out of the top 40. And it is like almost unusual now to hear like the guitar rock band. And that used to be dominant on the charts.
Yeah.
So what was it like? So what decisions did you guys have to make with that in mind, that you wanted to kind of have that guitar sound, but also still be relevant in the modern music scene?
Yeah, well, John, maybe I'll let you kind of, take the first half of this, because you can kind of talk about the previous songs leading up, and then, I can kind of give some thoughts as to our latest record.
Sure. Yeah, I think before the album, that's coming out on the 24th, we had 3 EPs before that. And most of those songs I would have written on guitar, a few of them on piano. And I think kind of rooted in like a 90s guitar vibe thing. And I would try to get some different sounds in there, but it'd be very, very pick your spots type of thing, like maybe on a bridge or a pad, underneath something on here or there. And I think this time around, like Felix said, we were definitely looking to do something more modern, but still keep guitar in there as an instrument, no pun intended, but like a tool that we could use. And so, we would look at things from a modern pop perspective, like you mentioned, top 40, where guitar is falling out of favor. but we would look at those songs and still think about, okay, well, what is a modern arrangement? And take some elements and if you look at if you look at the top 40 today versus the top 40 30 years ago, like the song lengths have gone way down, and most songs today might not have a bridge, they might start with the chorus. And so we were really kind of aware that things are changing and have changed quite a bit in terms of how long songs are and what the arrangement looks like. And so that was in the back of our back. We always do what serves the song, but that was in the back of our head in terms of how can we modernize this, but then also use guitars as well.
Yeah, and kind of building off of that is, John is obviously the longest standing member of the band at this point. But I joined the band maybe how long ago do you think it was, John? Maybe like 2.5 years ago at least.
Yeah. No, we did a lot of cover shows at first. Yeah.
Yeah, and so as work, I do run a studio here, and so when John started talking about the latest record and stuff, we kind of went down that rabbit hole, and that was this was the conversation that we had, and so we started shooting for more of that modern sound, and we had that conversation about like, well, hey, let's try putting more synth parts in here, and kind of trying to bridge the gap of a more modern sound with inspiration from the 90s and 70s and 80s and stuff like that. And it's kind of an interesting thing where, like, if you're in your car driving to work or something and you flip on the radio, you hear in like all the top pop hits, or talking like Taylor Swift and all those people. But then, after work, if you go to the bar, you're hearing a lot of like 90s rock, because I guess that's the age of people in the bars. And so part of it for us was like, well, like, we know that both genres work. Kind of how do we kind of bridge the gap so that it's more palatable online, but the people that are coming to the shows can still kind of hear something that they'll like too. So there was a big focus made for that. So hopefully we were able to achieve that, and when the record comes out, people can kind of make that correlation, but we'll see.
Yeah, I can hear it a lot in the production, and the songs do sound like they could have been performed initially on a piano or an acoustic guitar, like you said, and they would hold up nicely, but they feel like they're like decorated as well with that more modern, as far as like even like transitional parts go, a lot of the like there's like kind of like swells that are really popular these days, whereas in the 90s they might have been like guitar feedback and crazy drum fills.
Maybe
that's right.
too.
Do you have any theory, John? You mentioned about like the arrangements changing and the songs becoming shorter. Do you have any theories on what's causing that? Why that might be? Is it how we consume music these days?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's just it's the age of social media with the shorter feedback loops and just less patience, and so I think it's a direct result of just people's attention spans getting shorter. Both due to conditioning and probably due to chemical as well. I mean, I think there's probably a lot more people that would identify as ADHD today than there were 30 years ago. So I think there's tons of reasons for it. And it's a funny thing, because if you go back and you listen to like a song by a band like The Cure, they'll do this really long intro, sing a verse, do the intro again, sing a verse, then get to the chorus. I mean, you're 2 minutes in before you've gotten a chorus, if not, more than that. But yet it works. But, that kind of fit for that audience in that era, where maybe you're listening on cassette tape and you're driving to work. But now, your headphones, your apps, you got 5 apps open while you're supposed to be working probably. So I think you're just vying for attention a lot more, and that's kind of caused it.
Yeah. You don't really, back in those days, even with the CDs too, I mean, you could skip a track, but you're still on the same CD. You're still listening to the same album.
Right.
But cassette tape, that's a whole like additional when you're talking rewind, fast forward. So you would just deal with it. It wasn't just a button, and then it's totally new place.
Well, one of the other things that we learned recently too is sometimes John and I will take songwriting courses just in genres of pop and stuff to see, kind of what the trends are and maybe learn some other information. And we took a course with a guy named Ryan Tedder. And in that course, when he's talking about songwriting, he's like, the first thing that I remember from that course is he's like, nowadays everyone's writing the chorus first because he's like, you got 15 seconds for all these people on TikTok. And so you got to get your song on there. And so to John's point about, taking 2 minutes to get into it, I think modern songwriters these days are writing for TikTok and Instagram even more over than like the record or anything else. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, like we've seen songs like come back and become hits again because of TikTok.
Yeah.
Just the way it's being consumed again.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. I guess like the medium has always sort of informed how the songs were written, for commercial purposes. It was unusual to have like an 8-minute #1 hit on the radio. It's just too much airtime. So things were generally kept short to be the hits, but at least I guess like people were listening through a little more and getting in the zone. Do you find it a challenge to like, I always think of a song as like a world you go into and you get like kind of brought into the vibe. Do you find it challenging to create that in a shorter time, or do you have like any like ideas on how you can still accomplish that while kind of like, getting to the point, so to speak?
Well, I know that was a huge, that was probably the biggest thing I was trying to do. And I know Felix, I probably said this to Felix a few times, is I want to create a mood. And so that's like, it's kind of just another way of saying like, there's a world that you want to go into and you want to evoke imagery and you want to have, kind of this experience with it. I would say that's very hard to do no matter what. And then that's maybe a little more challenging if you have a certain time, like a kind of a restriction on it. But at the same time, and I'm just picking random, songs that just for whatever reason come to mind right now. But if you think about it, how long does it take you to get into a particular mood if you listen to Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper? Like you go there right away. Like she got you in the first 5 seconds. As soon as you hear the kind of the arpeggiated, guitar thing, like you're there. So I think artists have done it. And that's something we look to get better at doing. So I think you just have to get really good at it and you have to figure out a way to hook people in, as soon as possible.
I hear a lot of that in a lot of the production too, and the I guess like the warm pads that are kind of beneath things, like kind of gluing stuff together. Almost acts like it's almost like a reverb effect in a way, than that it's like this like kind of bed for the things to sit upon. I can hear that in your tracks a lot, so I guess that's like part of the consideration. But there is also the idea of like just getting there and pulling them in other ways too.
Yeah, Felix is probably best to speak to that. He produced the album and he has, so I'll come up with like the one stupid idea that works, maybe every, 10 days or something, but he's put in the 10,000 hours to kind of know like, hey, you don't want to over compress this. Like, he's kind of the taste tester of really keeping it so that, if you go back and listen to it 5 years from now, you don't make any stupid production mistakes that I know I would, and I have in the past, like, too much of a plug-in, too much of this or that, not clearing out some low end to make room for some other things. So he does a really good job of from a production perspective of, kind of knowing what it needs, I think.
So what does the process look like? Is it a full song you're coming up with and then handing over? Or is it kind of being written as it's being produced? I think more and more, I know for me, like more and more, when I'm writing music, I'm also like recording and producing it at the same time. How does that work for you guys?
Felix, do you want to start off?
Yeah, we've definitely done it a couple of different ways. I think on a 10-song album, we definitely mix it up a little bit just to, kind of keep ourselves honest, since, we don't want to rewrite the same song more than once. And as well as, give ourselves a challenge, as well as seeing if one of the techniques yielded better results than the others. But yeah, in most situations, John and I would sit in a room, we'd answer the question, is the song going to be fast, medium, or slow? And then what's the topic? And sometimes, we'll even do a writing prompt. Like I remember, one of the writing prompts is like Nothing Lasts Forever, which is the name of the first song on the record. And so we're like, well, hey, that song sounds a little bit, mid to fast tempo, feels like it could be a rock song. And like we know that like the tag is either going to be the first line of the chorus or the last line of the chorus. And so we kind of did that structure, and then we started noodling around on the guitar, right, wrote the right kind of the musical part of that. And then John's kind of coming up with the lyrics as I'm kind of finalizing some of the production. And then it kind of just goes from there. But a lot of times we would like to do like a full played demo of what we think it should sound like as a starting point, just to see if we like the song. There were definitely some songs on the record, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was the song Fiction the one we wrote like 3 times on the chorus before we realized that we liked what we had finally?
Yeah, I think that was one of them. At least 3. It might have been 5. Different rewrites.
Yeah.
Yeah, rewriting is a part of the process. I think especially when you start collaborating.
Yeah, that's what really made the difference. So every song that I'd written before writing this album, I went chronologically, intro, verse, chorus, whereas Felix is like, hey, let's talk about the chorus first, because if you don't have a chorus, then you don't have, a song that's really going to hit. And so that was very different, just because in my mind, I just went in, it makes sense. I just went in the sequence in which I listened to songs for all these years. And so I thought that's how you should do it, but it makes more sense, based on kind of the way he described it. And then having a co-writer is great, because you're a lot less likely to just leave good enough alone and somebody say, hey, this is, this melody needs to be written. And I think in this case, like Felix really helped make the bridges a lot stronger. Like for me, a bridge was, okay, what are the chords? Let me just invert that a little bit, and here we go. I think with Felix, co-writing, the bridges are true. There's some really cool moments in there that are different and unique. And again, we were conscious that a lot of modern music may not even have a bridge, but we liked kind of challenging ourselves to try to make it something that helps improve the song.
How do you approach writing a bridge then, Felix?
Well, yeah, so kind of, this is just my style. I don't know if it's entirely John's or not. So if it is yours, John, feel free to speak up. But kind of the way that I think we approached this was, to me, we were definitely trying to pull a lot of inspiration from top 40 songs. And so what they do in top 40 songs, which is probably exactly the same thing, it's just a different word, is that what they have something that's called like the post chorus, right? Which is, in a lot of songs, just like one word that they repeat for a bunch of times. And so it's kind of just it's just an extension of the chorus, really. But I guess in their world, they don't really want to label it as a bridge per se, because maybe they're thinking a bridge is something completely different, or maybe they just don't want to use the word bridge because they're not trying to write that. But so kind of what I did was I took inspiration from that. And when we got to our bridges, it's something that kind of needs to build off the chorus. And in my mind, it needs to be just as catchy, if not catchier. In a lot of the songs we wrote, the bridge was actually the biggest part of the song, kind of always this upwards journey. You hit the bridge and then you kind of come down as the song starts to wind down. Or, you kind of hit the bridge and kind of just plateau to the end of the song, so that kind of my philosophy is, if the listeners made it to the last chorus of the song, like they've earned it. They need a little bit of extra something special,
Right.
they've taken the time to listen to it. So hopefully, we can give them something special that they really enjoy the song. But yeah, so on the bridge, kind of the goal was to find something simplistic, because it's only going to happen once in the song, and something that's like catchy or memorable, so really you're just writing a second chorus per se. And yeah, I think there's some songs where we did a great job on those bridges, where I think the song let's see here, Break the Rules, I think, has a bridge that feels very anthemic when we get to that. I think Throw It Away has a pretty cool bridge. There's other songs where we got to the bridge, and because we had already done that prior, we wanted to do just the opposite. So like the last song on our record's called To the End. With that bridge, we kind of created the moment like you and John were talking about, where it becomes very ambient. It gets a little distorted, kind of like, you're thinking in your head, like if someone had an experience or traumatic experience, which is kind of how the song's talking about, like things aren't going well, but you're just going to see it through to the end. That we wanted to kind of create that feel of what someone could be feeling or hearing in their head, and thus kind of got very ambient, a little distorted, a little lo-fi, so that's kind of the opposite example where it became completely different so that it was memorable.
Yeah, almost like the experience is like reverberating in your memory a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
I like the way you guys, I noticed you talking about this, like in terms of like what it's going to do to the listener, how it's not, you're not saying like, well, then we'll switch to like this chord, or we'll change, the rhythm or something. You're thinking more in terms of like those feelings, those moods, and the journey really and like, it gives each part of the song like a purpose. Like this is here to do this for the song and for the listener.
Yeah, and one thing that like we've learned a lot and heard a lot recently, and it might be something that everyone kind of knows, but until it's pointed out, it's a little less obvious, is that there's a lot of psychology that goes into songwriting, and I guess we should point out the fact that most of our songwriting, we're trying to write for the listener. Some bands write for themselves as musicians. I think John and I definitely write for the listener and try to, put some of our thoughts in that as well. So we're trying to do both, but I think the fan comes first, but we're trying to do it in a cool way that they might enjoy it. And so a big thing that's always talked about in situations like that is you don't want to do too many changes too quickly, because it becomes confusing or off-putting. And so a big thing is like chord changes and stuff are important, but they have to be done subtly. So like if you want the listener to focus on the lyrics, then don't change the chords, because the lyrics are already changing. If they already know the lyrics, then maybe you can change the chords because they're used to the words. So we're trying to make one or two subtle changes each part of the song so that it's digestible, it's very user friendly, and enjoyable,
I've read David Byrne's book, How Music Works, I think it's called. And I love the way he spoke about it. And it's a lot of like what you're saying, that music has to be like familiar enough that you can digest it, understand it, but it can't be boring either. It has to still surprise you a little bit. And you can't go too far in that direction necessarily, because then it's just like, well, what the hell just happened here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Talking Heads, because I was going to reference them too, because they're one of those rare exceptions to where they were catchy, but different and unique musically and lyrically. And so that's definitely something it's definitely a band we look up to, and really appreciate, and we'll see what we do on the next one. But yeah, I mean, they were a band that every album was, definitely a little bit different. And so that's something we strive for.
Yeah, they went on a crazy journey, like almost punk rock to like just totally out there. But again, like it still had that thing, that it's accessible. Just I have a note to bring it up, and since we're like talking about some other bands, the cover you guys did of Drive by the Cars was just awesome. Really love that. And there's a song with like a mood, right? totally pulls you in right away as soon as you hear it. And still though, like that's another group too that gets like a little funny, a little weird, and does some stuff, especially I'm sure for the time. I was just like a small child at that point, so I couldn't have analyzed it on that level. But just it wasn't like everything else, and yet it was still very easy to get into.
Yeah, there's some songs that are like that and kind of staying in the 80s, like, Drive is one of those, With or Without You. And, those are just mood songs. I mean, they just, and that it may have peaked. I mean, that might be the best it ever got, really, in terms of production and mood, in my opinion. But yeah, that cover we did, that was a lot of fun, because the Cars version obviously is very synth heavy. I think you have no fewer than 7 synths going on at any given time. And then we said, well, let's do a guitar version. and so there's been some other artists that have done that. Soccer Mommy, who I'm definitely a fan of. She actually released hers around the same time we did ours. Luckily, it's not like people were, aware of us and there was any issue there. But I like her version a lot. But yeah, it's just it's a great song. Ben Orr just did a great job singing that one, and good tune, classic.
Yeah, I never really saw it played on guitar before, so it was fun to watch you pluck out the chords and play like melodic phrases with it. And still with just the 2 instruments really is all you had. It sounds very full, really nice, like again, like that, like pad keyboard, just kind of like operating a lot like reverb does on a sound, but giving something extra, a little bit of weight, a little bit of like a flotation device for the music.
Yeah, just kind of filling in all the nooks and crannies.
Yeah. Because like a guitar, and I think you were playing a Telecaster too. Like they have this like quick attack, and you're not playing with like heavy metal sustain and distortion, so it goes away fast. And it's nice how that sort of like comes in and swells up to just keep it above water.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, you definitely captured the vibe that we were trying to do between the 2 instruments.
Yeah. And you mentioned With or Without You too, which I think is a cool example, because I remember the first time I tried to learn how to play that, and just the chord progression is that I think it's the 1 5 6 4, which is just everywhere, but the way they do it, like you don't even notice it. It's like there's some chord progressions you just like hear and you're like, oh, it's that one again, that we hear all the time. But I just love it when a band or an artist are able to take that and just make you forget. I guess kind of like you were saying, Felix, like let you like not even notice it. The chords are changing because you're so tuned into the lyrics.
Yeah, and I think to that point too, what it kind of allows you to do that we notice is when you have a foundation that's not changing very often, then it lets you color the song a little bit more. So for us, we kind of did that so that we could put some cool guitar lines or some little synth parts or even some other extra little vocal parts in there. And the reason I think they stand out so much is because the chords aren't changing. So you're used to hearing that. But then when you hear them, now you're focusing on those extra new parts. So if we had changed the chords on some parts, it maybe it could have lost its value and things. So yeah, at least that's our theory.
No, I hear you, because and I started doing like live electronic style like performances, and one thing that often happens with like when you're going loop based stuff is you just kind of keep the same loop going for a long time and you build upon it. But what I have found is if you're, I guess, like judicious with the parts you put in and when you bring them in, and if you do like different parts at different times, it does, like you said, it colors it differently. It creates like almost like different chord extensions because you're playing different melody lines over it, and it can make something that's not really changing, especially if you just maybe alter the beat a little bit, suddenly it feels like a new part. While meanwhile, you still have that familiar thing coasting along.
Yeah, it's very interesting just how the mind works when you hear music, something as simple as a vocal line changing could be like, whoa, like, are the chords still the same? And then you check and they are, but it doesn't feel like it. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. I've had the same in the opposite way where the vocal line stays the same, but they switch the chord under it and you're like, ooh,
Yep.
you know?
Yep. Exactly.
I like the way you guys think so much about the like psychological impact and also just like the listener. Something I teach my students, and I teach a Berkeley online class for sampling, and we talk about like building songs and stuff. And I talk about like, what is your listener doing? We have this one project where it's their final project. They're getting ready to produce like a song, and the first week is like planning it. And most people are the way I am, honestly, where I'm just like, I'm gonna go in there and just see where it takes me, and ride the vibe and strum some chords. And I love doing that, but I very often come up with nothing in those situations. But the encouragement I always give is like, even though it might feel weird, is really think about it. Like, what are you trying to do with this song? And one of the considerations is, what is your listener doing when they put on this song? Why are they going to be listening to this? What is it? Because the way people consume music today, it's very unusual that people just sit down in front of their record player and put on their headphones and just go. They're usually doing something else as well in some other environment.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I think I remember reading something a long time ago about I think it was like Dave Grohl or someone was writing a song, and someone asked him like, what was kind of the thought process, and he's like, well, it's like this song, we wanted to write a song that would just be great to play live. So like when we were trying to dial in the BPM, he's like, we just thought, how fast could people jump at a comfortable level at our shows? And that was the BPM that we wrote the song at. So I was like, well, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. No, that's effective though, because you do have to like consider like what's happening, what's going on. In playing in bands, like normally we're like going to local bars, and it's just not the place for my deep artistic statement about my, emotional pain and stuff. Like, that's not why people are there. So I found myself in bands, and we were like, all right, well, we want to make these people have a great time. So let's do stuff that's going to be fun and make them want to buy more drinks and dance and, get into what we're doing.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the right philosophy. Working here in the studio all the time, kind of the first question that I ask a band when they come in and they want to either do a record or an EP or whatever it be, is I'm like, well, who are we writing these songs for? Because if they say they're writing the songs for themselves, most songwriting principles kind of go out the door. Because it's very experimental. It's what they want to hear. They're not trying to impress anybody, even though they probably do. They just don't think that. But if they, if they
it's not
approach,
cool to admit
like,
that.
yeah. But if they approach and they're like, well, we're trying to write a song that we think the fans are going to like, then it's like, well, now we got to open our toolbox of good songwriting practices. And, and one of those things is like, we got to take into account like where you're playing, what you want to happen when you play the song for them, which I think people sometimes forget. Be like, well, in your set list, is there a song that maybe you don't have a slow song, and maybe we need to write that song, or maybe you want another anthem that you feel like you can get people involved with, so we need to write a faster song. Some of these things I think are conversations that more people should have. They just choose not, and that's the biggest thing I notice with local bands is they're not really thinking about that. Like, it's not because they don't want to, they just maybe have never really put much energy into thinking into the philosophy. And I think when you start hearing good songs or songs that become timeless and you listen to the people that wrote them and their perspectives, it's really interesting to kind of hear what their goal was in mind, because 9 times out of 10 there was a goal in mind, and it was a lot more simple than just being like, oh, I wrote some chords and wrote some words.
Hmm. Well, to play maybe like the opposite side, of this, there's also like, growing up, you don't hear this as much anymore, but like growing up, it was like this idea of selling out, where you're not doing it
Yeah,
for
that's a
yourself.
thing.
I don't hear people ever say that anymore. I've had to explain it to some younger people. Like,
Yeah, it is interesting that that's gone away as an
yeah.
expression.
So I think that's like a big thing with a lot of bands too. It's like, well, we're not going to just make songs that are going to be for, to be popular or to be, hits. We're not going to sacrifice our art for that. Do you ever run into that? And if you do you have like any ideas on how you can balance that? Because it is, of course, as I'm agreeing with everything, playing devil's advocate a little bit, I suppose. But
Sure, yeah.
yeah, just like, how do you not go too far in the direction where you're just crowd pleasing and not staying true to yourself?
Yeah, I'll answer this, and if you want to jump in later, John, I'll let you take a stab. I think it's one of those things where I think a lot of bands, and this is a very like more of a local artist perspective, once you get on labels, you might be kind of told what to write. But
If you want to stay.
yeah, I think that a lot of local bands either see one or the other, but I don't know if they're necessarily thinking that a lot of times you can kind of do both, so like, maybe you want an experimental sound. Well, that might not be the most mainstream thing to do, but if you wrote an experimental sound in 3.5 minutes with structures of where the experimental sound was going, now you're kind of bridging the gap where now you went from like very like raw, experimental, to now you're like kind of a polished indie band, so you've kind of changed the bracket. And now one might say, well, that's very in now because it's very intentional. I think intentional is the key word in this scenario. If what you're doing is designed to do something and you're following certain, kind of good practices, I think a lot of what a band can do can be harnessed and not really selling out. It's just, we're cutting off the access, unnecessary stuff that's just, we didn't really need it there to start with, and kind of getting like giving the song a haircut, kind of trimming it up, making it look good, getting ready for it to go out on the town Friday night.
You save that for the box set, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, we talked about Talking Heads and, U2 With or Without You in the Cars and Drive, those are all still pop songs.
Yeah.
But they did it in a way that was true to them. And so I think what you do is sometimes not as important as, why you did it. If you're doing a pop song because your A&R rep said, you sold 5 million units last time. If we, research shows if we do it, that's a bad reason, to do it. But if you're doing it because you think it's artistically a way to express yourself and something you haven't done before, I think those are, that's a little bit better of a reason. It's a little more genuine. And I think people respond to that. I think people can tell when something was cooked in a boardroom versus, cooked in the band rehearsal space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. That's, I guess, where the selling out comes in, right? Where like, we need a hit, boys. We need to,
Yeah.
This is what everyone else is doing. You need to do it too. Wear this outfit and go out
well,
there.
that's a big part of it too. Is I've known bands that were chasing trends. When Pink was popular, they sounded like Pink. When a country band was popular, they switched to country. And everything was great in their band. They still wrote good songs. They still had great vocalists and things like that. But they were chasing trends. And people just don't respond to that. People like to be new. They like to think they're hearing something new.
Well, I think in the album you guys are putting out, which will be out September 24th. We'll give the plug. I think that'll be right around the time this comes out. But you guys are also making a little bit of a change in the sound, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like we're the rock thing, but we're also looking at the more pop accessibility, if that's fair to say.
Sure.
Did you find there were any like things in particular that maybe like, because it's not necessarily chasing trends, but were there things that you saw that were going on that you said, "Ooh, that fits nicely with us," and maybe other things like, you know what, that's not really going to work for us as a band of who we are?
I know for me, and then Felix, you might want to see if you were thinking the same way. For me, it's just concepts. I never get too caught into, we need a song that's about this, or this is really hot right now, or this band is really hot, and so we need to kind of do something that sounds like that. It's never that. It's always just again, concepts of like, well, arrangements are getting shorter. Let's be aware of that, and if we don't go shorter in our arrangement, let's make sure it's good, and that is still what you're going for is a good listening experience. So how you get there is can be different for each song. But so at the same time, there's like this, I think, awareness of what's going on. But for me, at least, it doesn't lead into any trends or trying to sound like anything. I'm very lucky in that sense. I don't feel like I come in with a kind of predisposed position.
Mm-hmm. What about on the production end, Felix? I know John before mentioned like you were like in a way sort of like the voice of reason, not going too far with a certain plugin or not doing anything like that stick out to you.
I don't think there were really either that or we just weren't aware. John and I are still trying to learn social media, so maybe some of these trends went over our head, but if we did hit one, it was definitely by accident. But I think that, like John was saying, the biggest thing we focused on, which I guess maybe it's considered a trend, is just the formula of songwriting and trying to keep a standardized time. If we're trying to write songs that'll fit in with the other group of songs, like we don't want to be too different that it's not going to be a good fit. But enough that like we realize that this is kind of what people want to hear, so we'll kind of stay in those means. But in terms of sounds or vibes, I don't think we really had much of an issue with that, because we're now presented with a current issue based on our songwriting that when people ask us who we sound like, we don't really know what to tell them. We can tell them bands that are like, slightly similar, like John will probably say, maybe there's some stuff that sounds a little bit like the Killers. I might say maybe there's some more modern stuff that sounds like the band Camino or Neon Trees or something. But like if you were to play a song back to back, we don't actually sound like them and they don't sound like us. So and I think a lot of that's probably due to the songwriting and sounds that we used. So I don't think we really had much of an issue with that, or I think we're different enough.
Yeah. Well, I think the structure of a song is probably the like least trendy thing you could pick, really, to like take note of, because that's something that really, I mean, even for myself, sometimes I'm not even noticing it as someone that, I think of myself as someone that writes songs. Like I can very easily listen to a new song and not even think about the fact that, oh, wow, that chorus happened right away, or this, so I think it's much less apparent than say like, I don't know, whatever the latest trend might be.
We all use some random vocal chop or something.
Yeah, or
Right.
Back in the day, right? The auto tune or whatever trend. Yeah.
So, do you have any particular influences then, like as a songwriter, John, that you like to draw from? Anyone like recent or new or anything like you've brought into your songwriting for this?
Yeah, there's so many good ones. I mean, that's kind of one of the benefits of social media and just the internet is you can just I could probably never listen to the same song twice for the rest of my life if I even listening to 8 hours of music a day. There's just so much good stuff out there. But the thing kind of foundationally is when I was learning guitar and writing songs in the 90s, it's kind of funny to think back to it, but I'm very glad that I grew up in that era versus maybe the 70s or even the 80s, because the barrier to entry of songwriting was so much lower. You know, you could be like a Rivers Cuomo and just kind of pouring your heart out and write a whole album. And that seemed attainable. You know, like it was really good. And he's a great songwriter, but it wasn't like it was an Eagles song that was written by 3 or 4 people that, you know, was, like Hotel California was recorded and re-recorded twice or whatever, you know, like it wasn't like it was attainable, you know, what you wanted to do. And so I don't draw on a lot of the 90s trends. And it's actually one of my least favorite decades of music, at least right now. That might change. It kind of evolves. But I'm glad I'm glad the first bands that I got into was just people that picked up a guitar and wrote a song by themselves. Very simple, you know? And then as I started to kind of explore different sounds, then I started to discover, like, you know, Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois and all these other producers that had these really cool things. And luckily Felix is able to, achieve those sounds and do things like that. But yeah, that's kind of where I come from like a songwriting perspective. It's just kind of my foundation.
It's pretty much the same for me. You know, I started playing guitar in the mid 90s, and Weezer, one of my favorite bands. And I love the new Weezer record. I think it's a great example. The Van Weezer record, I think it's a really cool example of a nice modern rock album. It's got so many throwbacks too of, like, you know, old like hair metal stuff. But as far as like the production goes, it sounds fresh and new, but it still sounds like a rock band.
It's a great album.
And you're right. Like, you could, in those days, there were so many songs that were just power chords, and just a few of them even, and you could pick them up real fast. I can remember it wasn't long into playing guitar where I was already playing some of my favorite songs on the radio. Wouldn't have happened if I was listening to Led Zeppelin. You know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it just, you had to be so proficient on your instrument to even begin that journey. And everything got a little segmented, right? You had to have your lead guitar, so you had your lead soaring vocals, and everybody was top notch. And that's cool too. But the other thing too is, when I was starting out in the 90s, there was only about 30 years of rock and roll to catch up on. If you wanted to go back to late 90s, late 50s, but like, let's just say 1963 to 1996 or something, you got about 30 years, give or take. And so it doesn't take you long to really kind of get into some cool stuff and get through the Beach Boys, get through the Beatles, get through Velvet Underground, get through Modern Lovers. Like, you can almost rattle it off. Like, we were all into the same stuff. And now there's 50, 60 years and just much more accessibility. So, it was kind of an interesting time to grow up and get through, the education of all these great bands that were out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy when you think about it that way. I've thought about how, like, like more time has passed since like Nirvana, Nevermind, 30 years now than had passed from Abbey Road to Nevermind.
Right. Like, yeah, it's crazy.
It felt like forever ago when I was a kid, well before my time. But now it's like, oh my God, like it's been that long, the space. Yeah. But you're right. Like, there was a lot. You could do it, you could take a course almost and just get through it and study it and figure it out.
Yep.
For you, Felix, maybe like from production angle, anything that was particularly influencing to you going into this project?
Well, it's kind of funny. John and I think the reason our songwriting works pretty well together is, John's kind of pulling inspirations from the older, bands and things from like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And for a production standpoint, I try to stay a little more modern. So, I'm listening to the Taylor Swifts and Dua Lipas of the world. But yeah, from a production standpoint, I think the only one that we, really had to work on just a little bit to get that vibe was, there's a song on the record called Speed of Sound, which is quite a little bit different than the rest of them, where John and I always joke about how we really love that like 80s sound. And so on that song, we were just like, well, hey, we got a bunch of these songs on the record. I think this is like the 6th or 7th song we were writing. We were like, well, let's do something a little crazy. Let's write a song that feels like it's, written in the 80s, and maybe make it feel a little modern as well, because I think a lot of people are starting to head that way. Maybe that was a trend that we chased. But so yeah, finding all those sounds and kind of writing a song lyrically that we think would be written then was kind of an interesting task we gave ourselves.
What kind of things did you guys latch on to?
Well, so the big one is like, drum sounds from the 80s are quite a bit different than now. So definitely took a little while to kind of figure out that tone and, kind of the guitar clean sound. And from a vocal melody perspective, John kind of approached me. He's like, well, we should do that like high falsetto, because that was like pretty in back then, because everyone had high voices for some reason. So we did that high falsetto lead vocal on the chorus and stuff, and tried to get a fun lyrical line, Speed of Sound, which feels like it's kind of an 80s sound line. So
could have been like a Top Gun song.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That was one that was definitely pulled some inspirations from a bunch of different places. So
well, and that's what's fun about doing an album is I feel like when you're doing an EP, at least for me, my mindset is always we need, every song needs to be a hit, needs to be a single. And then when you're doing an album, like you can do these left turns and kind of indulge a little bit. And I really enjoy that. This is the band's first album. Everything else prior had been EPs, and you kind of just write a bunch of songs. You take your best songs, but when you're writing an album, it's a different mindset and it's enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have that room to explore some other dimensions of the band, of your songwriting and production too.
Yep.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about like the cohesiveness of the album. And you kind of started touching on that a little bit, where you had a few songs that were similar and now you want to break away. But I still think they all work nicely together. Now, is this the result of having like recorded the parts like all at the same time, kind of like, was it like drum day, guitar day, and then, or were they more like one at a time? And just how you managed to keep things sounding like the same record?
Well, that's it's a big testament to the fact of you saying that, because this record was very much, every song was almost approached as its own entity. Obviously some of the themes, I think we kept the themes pretty similar throughout, but the people that we brought in for different parts and stuff were fairly similar, but there definitely were different people here and there. And then we had 4 or 5 different mix engineers mix the record. So that's a lot of different people and their personal tastes that kind of come into play. John, how do you kind of think we kind of kept that cohesiveness?
Well, as the vocalist, I feel like you're always going to get a certain amount of cohesiveness when you have the single vocalist, right? Like no matter how much I like to approach it and try to be different, I feel like, you're going to be, you're going to have a certain range, you're going to have a certain tone. And so I think that always puts you into a spot. But then, you just try to be careful with, like Felix mentioned, the drum sounds. There were times where we, went outside the box there if it fit the genre of the song. But for the most part, I think, the album kind of breaks down into 3 categories of songs, the kind of the rocker, faster tempo ones, the mid tempo, and then the slow ones. I think every album kind of breaks into that mold. Yeah, it just, I don't know, and maybe some of it's luck. I think we maybe got lucky with using all the different mixing engineers, and that just, it came out that way. So yeah, I don't know if it was conscious, but we maybe got lucky.
How was that for you, Felix, with having the different mixing engineers? I imagine, as you're putting this together, there's got to be some degree of mixing that goes on a little bit, even if it's not completely intentional.
So the way that we do this is you know, I'm pretty critical on the people that we hire, and John can tell you that. But what we would do is we'd do like a rough mix. So I would do a rough mix, kind of get everything where we want, and we would put that in the session and solo that. So whenever any mix engineer opened the session, they'd have to play our reference track first to kind of hear where we were hearing it. And a lot of these people, we're just sending the session and not actually the file. So like if they push play, they can kind of hear where we were kind of at almost. But yeah, there were some people that couldn't figure it out. I don't know if we want to name names, but he was definitely a very notable mix engineer that mixed Nickelback and all kinds of people, and he did not mix our record well, and we parted ways and hired someone else. So there was a level that we were trying to get. And then there's other people that we hired that were, we're like, well, we'll take a risk on them and see. And they turned out to be a perfect fit. And, we gave a lot of the work to that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we kind of had a clear vision of what we wanted them to sound like. And, we weren't crazy on the revisions, but we kind of very much made clear what we wanted. So I guess we got a little bit lucky that kind of the different people were able to get close enough. And maybe part of that's because we sent a reference mix that we're like, hey, if you do this, like we know they're all going to sound the same, and it won't matter that you live in Florida or Nashville or LA or something.
Right.
Well, Felix is being modest. It was a mix. It wasn't a reference mix. I mean, it was a good mix. And a couple of people came back and said, like, you already mixed the song, So, right. But I think what Felix was looking for out of it was, like this, but with more energy, or like this, but with insert attribute that we were trying to do better than. And that's probably why we went to so many different people to try to get that extra 5% or 10%.
Yeah. That's a cool way to go about it. I'm currently working on a record with my band. We're a 3-piece like rock band, and we have these 10 songs that are getting pretty close to being done. And one of the guys said to me, he's like, Bri, if you want to pass the mixing off to someone else, because it's very time consuming and all that. And like when he said that, I was like, oh no, I can't imagine like letting go of this thing now, like so deep in there. But there is definitely something to be said about someone else hearing it and just getting a different set of ears on it, because you just get so
that's
used
huge. Sometimes we were definitely, I guess we were fairly attached, but not super attached, in the sense of like we wanted it to come out with a certain vibe, and if that meant the guitar was really loud here or medium loud here, like I don't know if we cared as much about that. But yeah, the big thing for us was like, we've been in this song for a long time. We kind of had a clear vision of where it wanted to go, but we wanted to just try passing it off, letting them take a stab at it. Because sometimes what you think isn't annoying, they might think is. And we're like, this is another way to get a opinion of like, if there's some issues with the songs or something that shouldn't be as loud, it's, it'd be nice to hear it from someone before it's out there in the world.
Yeah, you're right. And especially when you're on the record and, you might either want your part cranked all the way up, or you might be a little like uncomfortable with it for whatever reason and tuck it too far away when it needs to be, further up. There's so many different things, from just like your ears, the sound of your room, to your own like insecurities or ego, depending, getting in the way of like how you actually perceive the mix.
Yeah.
That's cool. I think that's a good approach though, to like, say, hey, we got this pretty close to what we want. What can you do to make it?
Yeah, and to that point, there were a couple songs that I think I ended up mixing just because the other person just didn't do them as good as we were hoping. Or we had such a clear vision and we were already there that we just took the extra time and finished it out. And it's just two different ways of doing the same thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, and I mentioned that kind of categories of songs. And so, I think another reason why we had 3 or 4 mixers is there were some that were really good at mixing, the more layered atmospheric songs, some that were better at mixing the more straightforward rock songs. So it definitely, kind of depended on what we were doing. We didn't, we kind of geared each mixer towards a certain style of song within the album.
Yeah, it is pretty funny to think about that, since I don't know if we've really had this conversation too much, but yeah, it's kind of funny. The person that we got to mix the ambient ethereal songs is actually an 8-time Grammy winning Christian mixing engineer, which is like, well, now that we stop to think about it, it makes total sense. Christian music has so much ambience and vibe or whatever, and the person that we got to mix our like 80s pop, kind of Latin feeling song is mixed like Beyonce's song and Shakira. We're like, well, that's why it worked. Like, you don't put the pieces together sometimes until you start to think about it. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, you can kind of see how that work has, it might not be an obvious connection, but okay, I could get like why that person would be fit for the job.
Yeah. And then other people are, just let you down. So not discrediting that, but if you hire good people that have a good track record, so, you can see those connections most times.
Yeah. And Brian, for your record, I would recommend at least trying one song and having somebody do a mix, and you can include a reference mix, but get competitive with yourself too. And you might get it back and say, man, mine sounds so much better and your band likes your mix better, and that's great. And the opposite is you might get something back and you're like, whoa, I didn't think that drums are way too loud, but that really works. Like what, they put it on, they do something sideways that just makes it pop in a different way. So we like Felix said at the very beginning, like we're taking a course on songwriting. So we kind of really hit the educational thing. We really like to challenge ourselves with different things, and you end up growing one way or another. Sometimes it doesn't turn out the way you wanted. Sometimes it does, but it's a good way to kind of challenge yourself, keep it fresh.
Well, I guess there's a lot to be learned just hearing somebody else's interpretation of it.
Yeah.
This is what someone else would do with it. And there is it's probably an ego thing or just like attachment thing, I'm so far into it, like let me just send it off.
See, that's the best thing about you being in a 3-piece band is if you take a vote, there's never a tie.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, but I hadn't thought of the idea of kind of test driving it with like a track or two.
Right. Yeah.
That's not bad.
Food for thought.
Yeah. Do you guys supply your mixers with like another song that you like the mix of and say like, we kind of like the way this song sounds, maybe we're in that, is that?
Did we do that for any of the songs on the record, John? I know I've done that for other artists, but I don't know about us.
We may have once or twice. We kind of use the expression reference song. They're not our own song, but like you said, something that
this album sounds cool. Yeah. I love the drums on this one or something.
That can backfire. I would definitely do that with someone that I had a relationship with and I knew their work, but sometimes they can take it, there's like one, like it just maybe like an abstract vibe or one thing, and they just hear, they're like, oh, there's lots of reverb, let me reverb this out. You're like, well, no, it's not so much the reverb, I just kind of wanted the balance of it, and so sometimes the reference stuff can backfire a little bit, but we may have done that with one or two of the people, but I think it was more just us listening to what they had done and us kind of coming to them thinking that's the vibe we want.
Yeah, right. John brings up a good point. Sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it's taken too literally that it holds back some things that they could have done that would have been cool. Like let's say you send them a mix of like I don't know, like Dua Lipa, since that's what I'm listening to now, and you reference a specific song and like maybe the vocals are super dry and you're just like, I love the feel of this song, but so they're interpreting, oh, maybe they don't want reverb on the vocals or something, and then you get it back, you're like, man, I wish I had a little bit of reverb, or maybe it could have gone a little bit of a different way. But other times they're like, oh, like you want like kind of a pop song, and they're like, all right, I'm going to suit the song and kind of give it like the pop sound, and you get it back and you're like, whoa, like this thing sounds great. Like I wasn't thinking about it in that way, but now that I'm hearing it, like that's a great decision, so one or the other.
I think you need to kind of know what you're hiring the mixing engineer for. Are you hiring them to do something to be like something else? Or are you hiring them for their 20 years of experience to surprise you? And those are two very different things. And same thing with session players. Are you hiring them to play it like the demo, or come up with something else? And that's a spectrum, right? I mean, that's not just A and B. I mean, that could be a little bit of interpretation or a lot of interpretation. An evolution versus a revolution type of thing. So I think it helps to know like what you're looking for. And obviously, we're all constrained by time and money, so you kind of have to choose what your approach is.
Yeah, I think with mix engineers though, it's a little more predictable sometimes, because all you have to do is listen to their prior work, and the chances of them doing a similar thing is pretty high.
Pretty high. Yeah, I mean, they probably have templates and who knows what else. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I could see the point though. There's so many things in any given song to interpret that they might, if you're not careful.
Well, and one thing that and one thing that we did too, because there was a time or two, I think there was some like special effects that we put in the song. Like for example, we'll take the bridge of To the End Again. That has a very like distorted kind of radio kind of lo-fi vocal part. So in situations like that, we learned pretty quickly on that what you want to do is you want to commit any special effects that you want to the track. So if you really like that vibe or something, and I know to be creative, and this is something that I struggled with a long time till, you just finally start doing it and you realize it's just great. It works so well, but you have to commit to your thoughts sometimes, So it's like, I have this guitar and I'm running it through this, like, I'm just tracking it right into the computer because like maybe I want a Fender guitar amp, or maybe I want a Marshall. Like, I don't know yet. And like, we won't know till we get to the end of the song. Well, and that's great and everything, but sometimes you have to be like, it's a Fender. I'm committing to that thought. And once you commit to that thought, you realize like at the end of the day, you're like, well, is there even another sound? Like this sounds great. Or all my decisions have been based on this. Like it just works now, So yeah, if you hire mix engineers, if you have special effects and things, just commit those down if you dig them, because chances are they probably won't be able to recreate them as well. And at least that way, that you're going to have that effect in the track when it comes back. So
yeah, to recreate it can be
just some difficult and learned along the way.
Well, I think it's true because, like, really making a song is making lots and lots and lots of decisions.
Yeah.
And every next decision is based upon the decision you've already made. And we've had a number of those kinds of situations, like you said, like, well, we'll track the bass like direct and we'll run it through Amplitude and we'll have all these choices. And it's funny that like there's a couple songs where we didn't bother. We just plugged it in because we're just tracking. We'll figure that out later, and kind of forgot. And I'm adding my guitar over it, and then we listen. Like, man, the bass sounds cool. It's like, oh, this is a song we didn't even do anything to.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's because you keep making decisions, and the thing is like, I feel like, and I've thought about this many times, but never like been able to disprove it. Is I think sometimes the tones that you choose, like, I would be curious if like you could get to the end of a song and really go back and hate a tone you picked, because every decision you're making is, unintentionally based on that prior decision, So, I mean, I guess if you're a really bad musician and had like, practically tone deaf and maybe didn't know, it's plausible. But I think that every decision is subconsciously based on what's before it, that everything would be cohesive because everything is based on the prior, so it would all just work, but that's just still a philosophy.
Yeah, I had to live through the painful era of when DI was so popular. And the way I think of it is, recording an album with a lot of DI is like a painter using clear as a color and saying, well, we'll figure that out later. You didn't paint shit at the end of the day. Like, and you kind of have to pick a color. Like, is this supposed to be an energetic painting with orange or red? That, like you haven't picked a palette yet. And so to your point, Felix, I think that's why it matches, because you're literally matching to something. It's tempting. I get it, but it's, it's kind of paralysis by analysis type of so many options.
Yeah. And to John's point, it's not bad to do both. We definitely did both too, just as a backup, but I don't think we ever had to go to that because I
Yeah, we
think
never used it. Yeah, we didn't reamp
got
any of it.
lucky enough that it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's such a great way to put it. Not using any color, just clear. But it's true because like if I happen to record like a overly twangy guitar, I'm going to start compensating for that in the next
Yep.
things. And the only reason this new part fits is because that old part sounds like that.
Yeah,
And,
that's
and
exactly right.
I've definitely like ruined a lot of songs trying to go back. All right, well now I'll try a different guitar, and then you just hear it, and you're like, oh man, now I got to fix the bass, and now I got to fix that synth line, and
Well, and another fun one is, sometimes when you're writing demos, you play something and then it makes it to the final and you're just like, well, shoot, I wish I had tuned the guitar a little bit better because I can't recreate it. So
yeah.
we've learned that the hard way too.
Well, I guess tuning is kind of a must, right? Like you gotta
I
have your
suppose, but
guitar.
like, let's say maybe your guitar intonation wasn't perfect and you're like, well, it'll be a placeholder for now. We'll come back later when we
Uh-huh.
get, once we take the guitar in and get it serviced or something.
Yeah.
Then you're like, I can't do it again, for
Mhm.
who knows, whatever reason.
Magic is gone.
Now you're not, yeah.
Yeah, and that's like I have this written down, for to say this and ask you just about it, but like there is like this funny balance that you have to find, like the finding that like raw emotion and the feeling and the playing, which often equals imperfection, often because that's like, you're so aggressive on the guitar because you've got all that energy and it's a little bit sloppy. But then sometimes the production can come in and just like polish away all of the feeling. That's like the other balance you have to watch out for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there were I don't know if I ever told you this, John. No, I think so. But one of the songs, I think it was like the second song, Disguise on the record, that bass line that's in the song actually came from the demo, and
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know if there was much thought put to the tone at all, or, we kind of just slapped it down in there to kind of, get us hearing some sounds as we were starting to write. And then, at the end of the song, we're, after all, we played all the other parts, we're just like, oh, it's pretty close now. Like, maybe I wouldn't exactly have played those same notes had we done it again, but it might just work. So, we edited it a little bit and sent off and got mixed, and till today we hadn't even thought about it.
Right.
That's good when that works out.
Yeah.
Something's
so,
right if it's not jumping out at you.
yeah.
That.
So, kind of my our latest philosophy is everything you record, you got to do it right, because sadly it might make the final.
Yeah.
You may, you're expecting to have to do it better, once you know what the song sounds like and really hone that in. But a lot of times it just doesn't work that way.
Well, I know when I'm working on a track and recording and mixing, I'm listening to it like 40,000 times. So
yeah, you learn to love it.
you just like hear it that way after a while. I'm sure you've had this happen where you do a demo and you listen to it a lot and you love it, and then you try to record it and it's like, but the demo just has that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can.
Yeah,
It might not be good. It's just familiarity.
Yeah, and we get emotionally attached to stuff, and it puts us. There might have been a mood attached to it when it was original and inspiration. I mean, let's be honest. It's a lot more romantic to record something than to re-record something.
Yeah.
So it's two different mindsets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was watching an interview with Neil Young, and he's, if anybody's about authenticity, right? It's Neil Young,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, I don't even like. I got to record the song before I totally know it, before the band totally knows it, where we're still like finding it. And he doesn't like to have it get rehearsed too often because it just loses that something,
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially in like his singing, where he's just there doing it when he's feeling it rather than like going back and, trying to fix everything and get it perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough to find that balance, especially I think when you're doing multiple jobs, you're performing, you're recording, you're writing, you're doing the producing and stuff, that's the beauty of collaborators too, just to have that other set of ears to say, "No, keep that. That was a good take."
Well, and that was the funny part about this album is when it came time to play it live, we had to go learn the songs because we really just kind of got into a mood where we were writing. And like Felix said, we'd grab a bass guitar, come up with an idea, put it down. And so we had to really go back and learn it. Like, what was the progression again? I mean, it was kind of comical, actually. It's the first time that's ever happened.
Yeah. Oh, I've had that feeling a million times because most of the times lately, I'm writing as I'm recording. I'm getting the idea down. That's how I document and write, is through the recording process. Not like the old days, like the Beatles used to say, like they'd get together, Paul and John, and like they'd write a song, and if they didn't remember it the next day, they assumed it wasn't a good song. We would have remembered it if it was good.
Yeah.
Well, listen, guys, it's a lot of fun talking to you. I'm psyched for you guys on the release of the album. That'll be the 24th. It's on, I would imagine, all the streaming platforms, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Do you guys like to send people anywhere in particular to check out the band, the Slang?
Well, probably Spotify is their favorite streaming platform right now, and YouTube. We have a lot of content. We're very lucky. We have a lot of videos. We have 5 videos for this album. It's a 10-song album, and eventually we'll have 5
productions
videos
too. By the way, they look great. I mean,
Thank you.
Look like legit, like Hollywood.
Yeah,
style.
like we wanted a very cinematic style. We didn't want to be in it. We did 2 things. We wanted to look good, and we didn't want to be in it. We felt like those 2 requirements were compatible. So so we went with that direction. Nice.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And also you can see like the performance of Drive on there that we mentioned. That's on YouTube as well. So wherever you stream music, check out the Slang. The album's called The Divide, or just Divide. Something I like about your titles, by the way. I like the one-word title. I think that's, I don't know, something cool about that.
Yeah, that's my Peter Gabriel influence coming in, like, so, and, just very like, hey, let's not overthink this. I like simplicity. Yeah,
it's like when it's a one word, it feels more like a name than a title or something. There's something, I don't know, something I think about lately, like it's a name, not like the title of the song.
I feel like you either need to go really simple, like Divide, or So, or really complex, like, Melancholy, Infinite Sadness. Right. Real, limerick type of thing.
Yeah. That's true. That's funny. Great album too, by the way.
Yeah.
Good one for guitar players in the 90s.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Felix, John, thank you guys so much. Everyone, check out the Slang wherever you get your music streamed. Go to the YouTube. And thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the day.
Great. Thank you.